Patrick, you have some language. We had a motion made by Board Member Ramirez, and you were suggesting some language for us to consider.
Yeah, and I think Adam will be able to bring it up right away. You have it up in front of you. Essentially, there is a separation between the funds paid to the Waste Discharge Permit Fund for water quality certification or lack thereof violations, and violations of stormwater and 13385 typical violations. So that's just called out here. That's the only minor modification. This would replace the paragraph that is in the hereby ordered section of the administrative civil liability order that begins within 30 days of the adoption of this order that and ends in discharges of fill material violation 2. So that would totally these two paragraphs would replace that single paragraph.
Can I track this? Where am I supposed to go with that?
The last page of the ACL order on page 11. It's about 10 pages deep into your package.
No, I'm looking at it.
No. There's not a tab number on this one.
No. I guess my question, and maybe I'm missing it, but I thought the violation one was with both parties.
It's all three parties.
All three parties. Oh, there it is. I'm sorry. I was right. I just can't read. All right. Thank you.
And Patrick, what's the effect of these, of the new language?
The old language just says shall pay. This language specifies that there's actually two different funds that receive the monies. The Waste Discharge Permit Fund receives the monies from violation 2 due to 13385 N1, and you've got 13385 N1 also. Actually, that last one should be a 2. 13385 N1 says the State Water Pollution Cleanup and Abatement Account gets the funds from the stormwater violations, and the 401 certification violations go to the WDPF.
And that's a replacement of paragraphs 33 and 34?
No, that is a replacement of the
Oh, the
single
hereby
paragraph under hereby ordered
Oh, I
on
see.
page 11.
Okay. All right, so
Do we have a keyboard?
Are you willing to accept that language, Mr. Ramirez?
yes, so my motion, as made prior to the
And should be it.
to the lunch
last
break,
N1 should be
would stand
N2.
with the correction or with the addition of paragraphs 1 and 2 as displayed on the monitor, and that would be my motion.
And is there was a 1 supposed to be a 2 in this? Is that correct? Yeah. Oh, you just fixed it down at the bottom. Okay, great. Violation 2. Okay, or no, N2. Okay, gotcha. Do I have a second? Denise seconds. Do I see?
I was going to let you, but all right, I will second
John seconds, and that's with the
with these changes.
with late changes. Good. Very good. Any further discussion?
Only that it's yeah. I second it and I'll vote for it. But this whole issue is new and you know I just for the record I'm going back and forth whether to lower it or raise it or both at the same time. It's sending a message to me is a very important piece of that. But Pamela's point about a new regulatory regime and folks sort of having to learn as they go it's resonated as well. But I certainly don't want to drop it down to the slap on the wrist level. So this is where staff ended up, and I'll end up there as well.
Right, and regulatory regime, new program or not, this is in most respects no different than any, as I stated earlier, no different than any of the stormwater discharges that we have acted on with very hefty penalties typically. And so we take this seriously, regardless of who the discharger is. My concern that I was stating earlier was my highest priority is see this site rectified, cleanup and abatement order addresses that, and I want to see that cleanup and abatement order carried out. So with that said, are there any other comments?
I just have one comment. I just would like to make it clear that I'm basing my motion based on the facts. I mean, I understand that this is the first one going forward, but I don't think that it would necessarily be appropriate to say, hey, this is the first one, let's make an example out of them. I don't want to do that. I think that the remedy here that I'm proposing with my motion is tailored to the facts. The fact that it's the first
Exactly.
one is just happens to be, but you know, my motion is tailored to the facts before me.
And you believe this is consistent with what we've done in the past?
I think that this is fair according to the facts and the evidence that I have before me today.
Okay, very good. Any further comments? Call the roll, please.
Ms. Ramirez? Mr. Costantino? Ms. Cordova?
Yes.
Dr. Longley?
Yes,
Motion
motion carries.
carries.
Thank you. Very good. Let me
And it's over, but thank both the participants for coming, and hopefully the idea that spreading the word about whatever, checking, double checking, looking at what's going on, you know, and good luck to both of you moving forward. I know this was, when you get in the crosshairs of government, it's a tough place to be.
And there's some people that come before us that I think, oh, I'll see them again. And I don't feel that way about the parties before us. I mean, I think that, you know, it's easier to make decisions when the parties are dirtbags. And clearly today, there were no dirtbags here. So thanks again for stopping, for attending the hearing.
Very good. We're moving on to the next item, agenda item 22, which I understand is uncontested. Is that correct? Or do we have some, I don't have a card. I don't see anybody wishing to talk to this order.
Dr. Longley, it is uncontested.
Very good. This is the time and place for a hearing to consider renewal of the MPDS permit for the mineral wastewater treatment plant in Tehama County. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed action and wishes to present evidence or testimony on this matter? Seeing no one present to contest this matter, the board will proceed based on the agenda materials on the record. Are there any late revisions or staff comments?
No late revisions, no comments.
And Mr. Palupa, do you have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
It would be Mr. Jacobson.
Mr. Jacobson,
No issues.
thank you very much. Yeah, and your head has to be on a swivel up here, and we're moving quickly from item to item. The chair will entertain a motion to adopt the order to renew the MPDS permit.
I would so move.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Carmen moved and John seconded to renew the MPDS permit. Roll call, please.
Ms. Ramirez? Mr. Costantino? Ms. Cordova?
Yes.
Dr. Longley?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Motion carried, and we'll move on to agenda item 23. This is the time and place for a hearing to consider new waste discharge requirements for Seneca Mine, LLC, in Plumas County. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed action and wishes to present evidence or testimony on this matter? Seeing no one present to contest this matter, the board will proceed based on the agenda materials in the record. Are there any late revisions or staff comments? Which attorney is this?
This is me right now.
Okay.
My only comments were that there were even some additional late submittals. I recommend that they not be accepted into the record. What we're dealing with here, and the only persons to contest this, are apparently some old lessees who may have a cause of action against the current owner and Seneca Mine, but we're not in a proper position to adjudicate that decision. What we have is a report of waste discharge submitted by the parties that are named in the order, including the owners of the mine, and we will issue the waste discharge requirements as is without adjudicating that type of lease dispute.
Certainly. Is Dean Dennis here, or Eliezer Cohen? And you checked a card that you wish to speak, but you're not wishing to speak now. Is that the case? Okay, come up to the microphone, please.
Hi, good afternoon.
Your name and
My name is Eliezer. I go by Ellie. So.
and your affiliation.
I work for Gavrilov Law, and they're representing Seneca.
Thank you.
Case. There were 4 statements, I believe, that were submitted, and I was gonna. Oh, sorry. I think there were 4 statements that were submitted, so I was just gonna talk in case anyone else came up to oppose it, but we were in favor of granting.
Very
permit.
good. Very good. So you're not the other parties that
No,
have corresponded with us. Okay.
we were going to reiterate what he stated, and essentially.
Very good. Thank you very much. Just wanted to clear up those cards.
Thank you.
It's me this time. For the record, the submittals from Gavrilov Law Corporation were made some time ago, and those were admitted into the record.
Good. Well, since there's not anyone present who's contesting proposed hearing, the board will proceed based on the agenda materials in the record. Are there any late revisions or staff comments?
No late revisions.
Counsel, do you have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
I believe they have all been dealt with.
Thank you. The hearing is now closed. The chair will entertain a motion to adopt the order to revise the waste discharge requirements.
I so move.
Denise has moved. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Carmen seconds. Roll. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Costantino? Aye. Ms. Ramirez? Yes. Ms. Cordova?
Yes.
Dr. Longley?
Yes.
Motion carries.
So the motion carries, and we will now move to agenda item 24. At this time, we will receive an update, excuse me, we will receive an update on the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. This is an information item only, and no action will be taken, although the board may ask questions and provide direction to staff. The following interested parties will be given 5 minutes each to address the board: Laurel Firestone Community Water Center, Perry Klassen, East San Joaquin Coalition, Casey Kramer, Kings River Coalition, Bruce Haudeschelt, Sacramento Valley Coalition. Other interested parties will be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. We'll now hear the staff presentation. Sure.
Just before you get started, just for the record, I have a previous commitment, so I'm going to leave now, but I appreciate your time, and I did get a chance to look over it in the materials, but I will be leaving at this time. Thank you. Thank you.
That wasn't too bad.
Good afternoon, Chair Longley, members of the board. I'm Sue McConnell, Program Manager for the Irrigated Lands Program. This information item is about 2 issues related to the compliance of the irrigated lands general orders, allowing distance learning for growers and identifying disadvantaged communities. The first item addresses grower compliance, so I will start by briefly reviewing requirements for the growers. Growers regulated by the board's Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program are required to implement management practices to protect water quality. To identify necessary practices, growers are required to prepare farm plans, including farm evaluation, nitrogen management, and sediment and erosion control plans. Growers are also required to participate in coalition outreach events if they have parcels in high vulnerability areas. Outreach events are an important element of the Irrigated Lands program. The events are where growers learn about water quality problems and management practices available to address those problems. The East San Joaquin Coalition requested that growers be allowed to comply with their outreach requirement in a manner similar to distance learning. The coalition explained that the actual attendance by growers subject to the requirement is not always feasible. The coalition holds outreach meetings periodically, but it isn't always possible to accommodate the schedules of the large number of growers subject to the requirement. Also, some growers have physical limitations that make it difficult to attend the meetings in person. The coalition contends, and staff agrees, that the delivery of the information is more important than the method of delivery. Distance learning approaches are commonly used to deliver instruction to people not physically in attendance. The East San Joaquin Coalition proposed a video option so growers can still receive information even when they're unable to attend outreach events. The coalition would ensure the video content is consistent with the information provided at outreach events. The growers would watch the video at a designated location or on the internet, and the coalition would develop an appropriate confirmation method to ensure that growers are receiving the necessary information. And growers would then explain why attendance at an actual outreach event was not possible. Other coalitions are also interested in distance learning for their growers. Staff supports distance learning if coalitions are able to demonstrate that growers are receiving the necessary information. The Irrigated Lands General Orders do not need to be revised to allow distance learning. So staff thinks the board has a number of alternatives. The first is that the board can direct staff to provide a process for approving distance learning. Another alternative is that you can direct staff to revise the general orders to include specific conditions for distance learning. And then of course, you can direct staff not to allow distance learning. There are a number of coalition representatives here today who like to speak on this issue. I just want to mention that Mike Wickman was here earlier and he supports this and unfortunately had to leave before this item was brought up. So,
Can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead. I have a comment to make.
So on slide 4, if you want to go back a couple slides.
of course. Sorry.
So, just so I get this right, the coalition proposed that you have to justify why you wouldn't attend in person? Is that sort of a requirement of distance learning?
Well, they in their proposal, they mentioned that these would be the things that they would do, right? So right now, the order allows, their order, the East San Joaquin order, as well as the other general orders, do allow distance learning. It's a matter of accountability and what our board feels comfortable with in terms of making sure that the growers are getting that information. And I guess the concern is that if they're getting the information on the internet, that you want to make sure they're not distracted, they're actually receiving the information.
Well,
Sure. Well, that's a different issue. My question is, if we offer it, is it only eligible to those that justify a reason why they can't do it in person? I mean, are we making that distinction?
You know, it's up to the board and your direction
Okay.
to staff.
I just want to know
Right.
how was it proposed to us?
That was included in the original proposal, but
Okay.
it doesn't need to be a component of
We can have them
distance learning.
talk about it. Thank you.
Sure.
I've started working with distance learning, at least 15 years ago as an academic. As an academic dean, I put a program into Lancaster out of Fresno. Since then, we moved on into using software such as Blackboard and so forth. Justify not attending in person is, could be, I would think, for the same reason that I listen to webinars rather than sit in the room. There's a time and distance issue, and Pete's an experience with that. So, there are other things you can do, certainly. I know with Blackboard you have the capability of doing live lectures, or you can present materials where people can take it to when they can within a particular time frame. You have the ability, certainly, particularly with when you're on with a webinar or something of that nature, to ensure who's logged in and who's not logged in, and if they log out, you know that. You can also ask questions and require responses. One of the things that people often like to do is get some response from the audience. There's a lot of reasons for doing that, is to making sure, are we really on track with the information these folks need, or is there something else that we should be talking about? So there's a lot of reasons for asking questions of the participants. Besides just gauging whether or not they're understanding what's being given, is also are we given the right material? So, I support this. I think there's a lot to be learned, and a lot of those lessons have already been learned by those people who do it. And I'm sure that if it's kicked off, that folks like Perry Klassen will go to some of the experts and make sure that it's done correctly. Knowing Perry, he's very much up on those kind of things. So I think that's all I have to say, but I think this is a great step. It's just, hey, look, it's the 21st century. We're digital now. At least they're doing this visually. They're not sending text messages back and forth to growers, which to some of us old guys, that becomes a little bit
Dr. Longley, they
disconcerting.
might listen to it more.
That's
Seems to
right.
be the way people communicate now.
That's right. That's right. They do.
And Sue, is it envisioned that there would be one video for all coalitions, or each coalition would be responsible for their own if they wanted to do it this way?
Right. We would work with the coalitions to see what made sense for them. We actually haven't talked about options. I guess I was thinking that they would do their own, but it actually makes sense to maybe have a combined one as well. Those are not.
My own opinion is that's up to the coalitions.
Yeah.
I would think that there is some standard material
Right.
that they may want to work together for the cost savings primarily. Also allows them, with the monies that are available, maybe to develop some standard materials that they would present. Some of it may be just simply go on your own, this is online, and then come back to something else. I think there's going to be a big learning curve here. I think it's going to be positive, though, and I think if they would come back in a couple of years and tell us what their experiences are, it'd be very interesting to see what they found was most effective.
That's great. Did you still want to hear from the coalitions, or?
We never want to hear from the coalitions.
Hey, Dr. Longley?
Yes.
The two topics of this presentation are somewhat different, and so we could bring up the coalitions now to comment on this topic, and then again after the next topic. It's whatever's your pleasure.
I think let's cover distance learning and then move on to the other item, the other part of this presentation. So whoever wants to speak to this, please come forward. Oh, I got Casey.
Dr. Longley, members of the board, Casey Creamer, Kings River Water Quality Coalition. Just want to stress that the distance learning option is an important option for us in the Kings. We have 5,000 members, from the very biggest to the smallest as well. Also diversity in culture and language barriers. There's all kinds of diversity in our coalition. Education and outreach is absolutely important to us. It's the #1 tool we will have to use in getting compliance with these orders. We held close to 30 outreach events within about 6-week period. We had very good attendance. One of the events, we had room for about 700 people, and we probably got 1,100 people trying to show up at the event. Trying to guess how many people will actually show up is not an easy thing to do. We did a lot of education and outreach on the initial sign-up period, and it was crickets when people actually showed up to meetings. But surprising, we got actual very good participation as far as people actually enrolling. So when we set up our annual meeting, we were surprised to get the number of people actually physically show up.
And I heard people griping about the fact, driving around the parking lot, not
Many
being
were
able to find
upset.
a place
I
to
think-
park.
I think some thought it was the farm show. We had more of a traffic problem than the farm show actually had. It was quite an experience.
Right.
We had people from San Jose. We had people taking time off of work because this is a member requirement. It's not necessarily the person actually farming it. People taking time off of work, people driving from San Jose, people from all over. So growers will show up. Growers like to be physically at meetings, but the next generation is looking for this web-based.
Right. And what I'm thinking, education is such an important part of this, as you pointed out, and as Sue pointed out. But this education and training, I think we have to think it through as we go down the road. Yeah, something for the growers, but maybe we need to start putting together packages that are good for the person that's out in the field handling the irrigation equipment. I know there's a huge issue on O&M on some of that equipment as we're moving into the water management programs. You know, some of this may fit in with that. And that's why I say we have to be pretty flexible as we go through, so that for every dollar cent you're getting the biggest buck of return as far as the practices out in the field.
Yeah, I agree. We're going to be looking at all of those types of things. What I want to point out is that there's flexibility already built in the order. I don't think you need to change the order one bit. There's two different requirements. There's a member requirement and the coalition requirement. The coalitions have to keep attendance records for all of our events, and we turn into you the number of participants. We don't turn in actual names, so that's available to you guys if you want access to it. The member at the end of the year has to certify to us that they've attended or participated in an education and outreach event. They've downloaded the materials, read the materials, and understand the materials. And so at the end of the year, what we are doing in both distance learning options and physical attendance options, so just getting a card or signing in at the event does not give you the credit. It is the member actually certifying at the end of the year that they've attended, they've participated, they understand the materials, and they are specifically certifying. So we're going to send them a notice and ask them those questions, and they're going to attest to the fact that they've done it. So to me, the question is how you define participate in the order. Is participate only physically sitting in a meeting, or is participating viewing a meeting, or is participating, what's your definition of participate? So I think you have all of the elements currently in the order, and the order doesn't need to be changed one bit. So.
Well, I have talked to students sitting in a classroom who seem to be wide awake and bright, and who failed to answer the question I asked. There was one student I remember who was sleepy, and I asked him the question, and he answered it perfectly. So there you go. You never know. But I commend you for the effort, and you talk about that certification. Maybe downtime, has the irrigator himself or herself been properly trained? Because this O&M issue is such an important part of the overall.
And just to keep in perspective, this requirement versus the other requirements, what I view as probably the most important thing for groundwater protection is the nitrogen management plan. And in that, you have education outreach requirements that are separate from this requirement. You have certification requirements and education requirements, and I would envision all those things being part of that program as well.
Good, thank you.
So, Casey, let me ask you a question. Is there any value in if we went this route to have a 1 in 4 year in-person attendance? Is there any value in that to get, or if we go all? I mean, if this becomes an option, you may never see these. I know you see them all the time, but
Yeah.
as far as education-wise.
Well, I would say that the order allows the flexibility. I don't have the answer to you. I couldn't tell you 75% attendance in person, 25 via web. I don't know the answer to it. But what I would say is that there's flexibility built in this order, and there haven't been any identified problems with this at this point. So this is something I think down the road, if you want to look at again and reopen the orders and say we've got problems with growers, not getting the information, then I say we bring it back. But
My own personal opinion is that you have flexibility, use that to the best interest of the program and us and the growers. University of Colorado has a master's degree program, a number of areas, engineering among them, and they require 2-week residence so they can see the people, make sure they're real, that have enrolled in this program. I think everybody's embarrassed because in the physics department at UC Berkeley, they graduated a dog. But they really did. But you know your people. And so I'm not saying by that statement that they did this simply to make sure that the person that signed up was real. I think you know they're real. You got their parcel number and everything else.
yeah, and we are working on additional data
Right.
abilities to check all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you get numbers of attendees, and that's way off from what you can verify. I mean, then you have an issue and you work to address it. So.
Very good. Anyone? Bruce?
Bruce Haldershot, Sac Valley Water Quality Coalition. Casey did a great job. I would just underscore what he said. And one of the elements of the education and outreach is when you have a surface water quality management plan or a groundwater quality management plan, you're going to be educating a subset of the larger whole. You've been I thought distance learning was about the annual meeting in Alturas, in the Pitt River. That's a joke. But you've been where we have great turnout
Right.
of members. And so the opportunity to not only, some of us learn by reading, some of us learn by viewing, to give that opportunity to folks who can't make a date and time for a registered pesticide outreach on something, to go into the archives, pull that up, and to be able to familiarize themselves and say, okay. So I would just, I'd underscore that as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I did
appreciate it.
appreciate attending that meeting at Pitt River.
Yeah, you saw it, and it gets to John's question. I mean, you regularly
Right.
have about 125 people showing up in that particular sub-watershed. If there's not issues related to it, a 1 in 4, they probably go, okay, yeah.
Yep.
And they're reading about it, and they know if something has changed significantly. The other aspect, and I think Casey alluded to this, is I think there's opportunities also within the order for certification, for outreach. We've got to train the trainer, but you can go online and go through something like the International Plant Nutrition Institute program of the 4 R's and get some certification for that. And I think that's the core element here, is making sure there's transparency, accountability, and education on some really critical things that impact our groundwater basins.
Exactly, and as I think I indicated earlier, I don't look at this as one way.
Right.
I think the feedback that you get off of it, and becomes, in a sense, it becomes even simpler when you're doing the distance learning mode.
Mhm.
They're on a computer,
Right.
typically a keyboard in front of them. You have the mechanism while something's going on for them to give feedback.
Right.
That becomes a very valuable tool to make some judgments on the program itself.
I think it's every 2 years as a Roseville Planning Commissioner, I have to go through ethics training, and, I have to stay online for a minimum of 2 hours. If I answer the question sooner, I can't get off. So really, it
Familiar
requires
with
me to
that.
go over that page again and And actually, you know, it's very valuable because you learn the nuances of some of the
I
things.
just went through harassment training, heaven forbid.
Sorry, I hope that was a,
You do a good
Thank you.
job with
I
that, Dr. Long.
Harass the staff in the process.
Don't harass these coalitions, Mr. Longley. Harry Clausen, East San Joaquin Water Coalition. One other thing I want to add, I think everybody's covered it, is that we have a membership requirement to go to these meetings, and I would hope that this enforcement or follow-up with members, this would be low on the list after nitrogen plan, farm evaluation, because just to give you an idea of the scope is that we've been doing these for many years. We have 3,900 members. We had last year 2,500 members attend an outreach meeting, and we had 12. We didn't have as many as Casey did, but no, 18 meetings. This year we're almost finished, or we've got one more set of meetings in the fall. We have 3,900 members, 2,400 so far, 1,500 still haven't gone. And we have, I don't know if our area is not atypical of the valley. When I have a meeting in Merced, the average age is probably 75 to 80 in the audience. And I think that and these older folks own the land, but they're not farming it anymore. So the member requirement is, it's like asking maybe your mother to go to, she's a farmer, right? To go to an outreach meeting. It's not realistic because she's not out there driving the tractor.
But I'm going to nail her.
You're going to have her up here in front of it. But I think we got to be, just like we're going to be flexible with this outreach, this should be low on the list of sending. We've got a nasty gram letter from you all for our farm evaluations. That's I believe that's legitimate.
Well,
but this is, you got to have a little bit of flexibility here.
Yeah, as I was indicating before, I think this gives you a better opportunity to communicate. First of all, you don't have the time and distance issue. You might offer it at a different time.
Right.
You can get 1,500 people at once, where it's going to, the logistics on that are very difficult otherwise.
Right.
It's been said, I keep hearing that some farmers don't have computers. I find that hard to believe. At least have their grandkids get them online and they can participate. So I think this is really a great thing, and it's how it's handled and the kind of feedback you can get. I think the feedback is very important. I know I keep saying that.
Yes, and we're using the audience response devices, and we're trying to improve as we go, get past it. This is the WDR, this is the requirements. Yes, we're going to have to start talking about nitrogen education, but we get a lot of calls. My staff gets calls from these worried little old lady that's sitting at home. I can't make it to the meeting. So I think if we can give them a little comfort that, look, this is, you send your field man or the guy that's leasing your land, and that's adequate. I think that's the kind of flexibility we need, in addition to what Casey and Bruce have talked about. So I think we're on the right track.
Very good.
Dr. Longley, I know the order is very open in terms of what I can approve in terms of their educational outreach opportunity, but you just mentioned something about who needs to attend. I can't remember the exact language in the order. Is it specific that it has to be the landowner?
Member.
The member.
But the member is typically paying, the one that's paying the dues is the landowner, and a lot of times they lease it and don't assign that. We're getting into doing that more for all these reports.
So that is pretty rigid because it's in the order that, so that's another thing the board you might want to give us guidance on is, should we expand that language to being the landowner or their delegated authority?
And we now say just the landowner?
Member.
Member.
We say the member has to come to the outreach? One meeting a year.
So it would be the operator?
Yes.
Is what you're suggesting?
Or their
Landowner
assigned-
or operator?
Or their
Or their
assigned
assigned
person.
representative.
Or their assigned representative.
Or operator, any of the terms that. Yes, it could be or, but I'm saying that the people that are older that can't go should be able to assign that to somebody. And not.
Well, if they can't go because they're old, that's, you know, that age group you're
that's a
talking
tender
about.
spot
I
there,
was feeling
Gary.
real sensitive when you were talking about that age group.
I need sensitivity training.
we just lost the executive officer. So you know, I'd appreciate if the board could bring language back to us and bring the item back to us if we need to.
Well, we don't need
make
to,
a ma-
we would, to change, if the board is open to that suggestion, we could do a resolution that would change the language in all the orders at one time to allow it to be member or their designated representative.
Yeah.
Very good. Is, are you,
I'm okay with that as long as the member understands that they're delegating the responsibility and that person has to, and they're not delegating, I mean, it still falls back on the member if something happens and.
Oh, that, yeah, it
sure.
doesn't
Right,
alleviate
yeah.
them.
Okay.
And we explain that, but again, the farm evaluation nitrogen management plan, you don't want grandma in there learning how to do that. It's the person that's in the field that's doing this work.
Sure.
So that's.
Yeah,
designated rep.
well, what I think John's saying is that grandma has to understand that the person in the field better know what they're doing.
Grandma never gets off the hook.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
You got that right, yes.
So
And
when you,
that's
the
explained.
designated person, I don't know if the word appropriate designee or designated person might be, because it could be, just sending someone to be represented, but they won't have an understanding of the situation.
Yeah,
so.
we do, I mean, in a number of our orders, we have language that would allow delegates to fulfill certain roles, provided that the person who's delegating the authority checks off a box and is aware and assumes responsibility for that delegation. So, again, that's not in front of the board today, but I assume we'd hammer out some language to that effect if this came back in front.
I think staff got the message. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Board Member Longley, members of the board, David Corey representing the San Joaquin Valley Drainage Authority and the West Side San Joaquin River Watershed Coalition. I slowed down, thank you. On the last subject, I do think a designee makes sense. I mean, if you think about it, there's a lot of lands owned by corporations. At that point, who do you send? I mean, so do you have an advantage that you're a corporation rather than, or held by a trust? I mean, how does this whole thing work? So when you think about practically the different ownership interests in land, it has to be that way or it doesn't make any sense. So I think if we have to clean that language up, it makes sense to do that.
I saw Patrick shaking his head to the affirmative.
So let me start with, I appreciate the fact that you guys discussed this issue a little bit beforehand, so we kind of had an idea of what you were thinking, and I have some idea of what to talk about, because rather than drone on about things you're not interested in, and I'll try and hit on a couple of points that you might be interested in. First, I had the same question you had on justify. Really? I mean, do we have to justify why we have to attend in person or online? Is that really necessary? I mean, if we're getting the information, we should be getting the information. As long as justify can be something as simple as, I couldn't find my shoes this morning or something. I don't know what, does it have, it raised a lot of questions.
Right,
I agree.
I really have no question on justify. I'm saying the main reason you might want to check is make sure for those who do want to come, you've got enough chairs for them.
Yeah, but it just I didn't know what it meant.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and to answer your question, I agree. If unless there's some regulatory language you wanted to set a high bar, you could justify it by saying, I just don't want to go. I'd rather do it
Yeah,
at home.
exactly,
Right.
yeah.
So I'm not. I don't need a justification. I just
Yeah.
wanted to see where things.
I had the same question, so I was glad you raised it, and I'm on board with you. It didn't seem like it should be a requirement. On the educating irrigator side of it, I think from my perspective, when you go back to it, the landowner, the operator, the member actually ultimately has the responsibility that we address water quality issues. And the way we've dealt with it on our farm, when you have an issue that's important for the irrigator to know about, you talk to them about it. I mean, we had a safety meeting yesterday, and we were talking about water management, we were talking about heat safety, we were talking about all of those things that come up in that process. But I don't think my irrigator needs to go to an education outreach event hosted by Perry Clausen. I think as the grower, we have the ultimate responsibility to comply. We need to bring the information to the appropriate people so that we make sure what needs to get done gets done. And if we don't, it falls on us.
That's right. But I think that the coalition might consider, if their members want certain educational materials developed, possibly in Spanish or another language, that they can use at carrying out their responsibility.
Right, no, those
another
tools could
function.
be helpful, but I didn't see it as a
No.
regulatory requirement, just as a tool that growers might want from their coalition. And we're certainly going to be responsive to the needs of our members in the coalition and
But
and
if
what
you're,
they need.
if
So,
you're doing that, I'm very interested in it because it's a tool that can be made available to others too.
yeah, a lot of times, probably sitting down and talking to them is the best way to go about doing it. But I appreciate your thoughts, and I'm supportive of the distance learning concept. So thank you.
On the other hand, particularly with some of the larger organizations, there may be a number of mid-level people in the organization that could benefit from
Yeah,
some
exactly.
materials that are prepared. I think you folks have to work that out.
Yeah, and we will be working that out. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Longley, one other item that Sue didn't bring up, and I just dawned on me listening to the coalition speak. In terms of attendance, we require this in every one of our orders of landowners or members within each of the different coalitions. We do have some individuals who are members to many coalitions. And I don't know, at first they were, in conversations with staff, we had said that they should attend those, and if we do this distance learning, it'll make it easier for them to attend it. I guess the question for the coalitions are there educational programs so different that they need to be attending all the coalitions, or is this board open to the idea that if they attend a lesson, an outreach in Perry's, it could apply to Bruce's coalition as well? And I don't know where the board is on that either.
I think that's a good question, and if there's sufficient similarity, I think that's something you have to design into your program. This board would be interested to consider it. With that said, for farmers that have operations in, let's say, in Fresno County, Kern County, down into Tulare County, and maybe farther, and they have different foremans in those areas. People, I say foremans, people who are running those farming operations. I guess we have to think that one through. So.
Yeah, if they're moving to the person delegated to attend, then that might be a different scenario than
That's
one
right.
individual. Yeah.
So.
Well, it's only been raised by one individual. It was.
So think that one through, and we'll want to talk to you about that later.
Well, one last comment. I know we've been talking a lot about this, but if we head down a path where we're going to do resolution to, if we need to amend everything to make them consistent, I would prefer that this distance learning be explicitly clarified. I mean, I know I don't want to see everything come back to the board. I think that's where Casey was going. We don't need to go through the whole process, but if there's an expedited way to
The distance learning can happen tomorrow with my approval
Okay.
of it. It's allowing a delegated representative that's not allowed right now, and that would require permit revision.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Very good. Any further questions? We'll move on. Sue?
So I'm just want to double check. We're going with option number 1, right? Yes.
Yes,
Direct.
in the sense of who the delegated person is. And certainly we are allowing distance learning.
Right, perfect. Thank you. So the second issue is related to prioritization of the irrigated lands groundwater management activities. In 2012, California enacted the Human Right to Water Law, which states that all Californians have the right to safe, clean, and affordable water. In the Irrigated Lands Program, staff considers the law by working with the agricultural coalitions to prioritize groundwater management activities near disadvantaged communities that rely on groundwater for drinking. By disadvantaged communities, I'm referring to both incorporated and unincorporated communities. Disadvantaged unincorporated communities are of a particular concern for drinking water, and I will discuss more about them later. To ensure that disadvantaged communities are defined appropriately, the environmental justice groups and the Office of Public Participation were consulted, and staff worked with the coalitions and are working with the coalitions as they develop groundwater management plans to prioritize disadvantaged communities reliant on groundwater. The California Water Code's definition for disadvantaged community is a community with an annual median household income that is less than 80% of the statewide annual median household income. A very similar definition is contained in the Health and Safety Code and the Public Resources Code. This definition is used by the water boards in the Department of Water Resources, and it's a definition that staff is recommending for use in the Irrigated Lands Program. So now I will discuss tools available to delineate disadvantaged communities. One of the tools that has been discussed for use for delineating disadvantaged communities is CalEnviroScreen. It was mandated by Senate Bill 535 to distribute the Air Board's cap and trade funds to benefit disadvantaged communities. It identifies communities that are burdened with multiple sources of pollution and pollution characteristics. In contrast to the Water Code's income-based definition of disadvantaged communities, CalEnviroScreen considers 19 environmental, health, and social economic conditions. This slide shows the 19 indicators used. 7 are for exposure to pollution, 5 for effects of pollution, 3 for sensitive populations, and 4 for socioeconomics, including income. The CalEnviroScreen disadvantaged communities are shown here in yellow, identifying the most impacted 25% of the census tracts in the state. Census tracts will be defined in the next slide. Because it uses a different definition than the Water Code, staff does not recommend using CalEnviroScreen to delineate disadvantaged communities for the Irrigated Lands Program. But I want to note that CalEnviroScreen does contain useful drinking water information that unfortunately right now non-governmental entities are denied access to because of confidentiality requirements. Staff will be revisiting the policies and laws regarding disclosure of well information to try to help make this information available.
I have to get re-involved with EnviroScreen, but the problem, and this is version 2 that you're talking about.
This is version 2, absolutely.
Is the census tract, because within a census tract we can have some folks with pretty high income and folks with lower income. With some of our communities, disadvantaged communities, that's not a big issue, but in other cases, particularly in urban areas, and we've shown that in urban areas such as Sacramento or any other urban area in the state, there are disadvantaged communities. The city of Fresno has them. And within a census tract, you find all kinds of income, so the data is horribly skewed.
Right.
So I would agree that we should not use CalEnviroScreen. I would agree that it has some information that's useful. I also believe and was hoping that there'd be another version of CalEnviroScreen that would fix the census tract problem. So I think that's something that we need to be looking for, we need to be encouraging and so forth. Of course, Cal EPA needs to be convinced that that needs to be done.
Right, right.
And I would say I'm in agreement with that, Dr. Longley. I mean, so much of the data that goes into the urban areas, like you said. And so I certainly would.
Okay. So move on to another tool. The Department of Water Resources, or DWR, also has a map-based disadvantaged communities mapping tool. This tool does use the water board's or the Water Code's definition for disadvantaged communities. I'm going to start referring to them as DACs. It allows DACs to be mapped as census tracts, census block groups, or census places. Census tracts are relatively permanent subdivisions of a county generally with less than 8,000 people. Census block groups are divisions of census tracts, generally with less than 3,000 people. And census places, I couldn't find a population statistics for it, but it's much smaller than census tracts and census block groups. The DWR tool is being used by the IRWIMPs and the coalitions now to define disadvantaged communities. So this figure shows the DWR tool defining DACs using census tracts. It indicates about 68% of our region as disadvantaged. This figure shows the DWR tool mapping DACs as census block groups, and it indicates about 64% of our region as disadvantaged. So the DWR tool also can map disadvantaged communities as census places. Census places are concentrations of populations with names that are locally recognized. Census places include both incorporated places and census designated places. Incorporated places are self-governing cities or towns, whereas census designated places are unincorporated places that are delineated and tracked by the census. This figure shows the DWR tool mapping disadvantaged communities as census places. It designates about 4% of the Central Valley region as disadvantaged. It's important to note, like I said earlier, that the census places include both incorporated and unincorporated places tracked by the census. But because disadvantaged unincorporated communities are a special concern with regard to safe drinking water, additional studies have been conducted to delineate disadvantaged unincorporated communities not tracked by the census. And one such study was conducted by PolicyLink. That study found that disadvantaged unincorporated communities not tracked by the Census Bureau have more low-income households. The study used the Water Code's definition for disadvantaged communities to identify disadvantaged unincorporated communities in the San Joaquin Valley using census data from the year 2000. And PolicyLink, as they find additional funding partners, they're going to be using this tool to identify disadvantaged unincorporated communities in more counties using the 2010 census data. Here, the PolicyLink disadvantaged unincorporated communities are shown in black, overlying the DWR DAC places in blue. Currently, I want to just mention that the PolicyLink tool does cover over half, well, slightly over half, 54% of our region.
This does not show the Sacramento
It does not,
Basin.
so it's south of the Delta.
south of the Delta.
And I can tell you the counties if you're interested.
Yeah, well, the reason I was interested, if you go to the previous slide,
This one or the one before?
the one before,
Okay,
one before that, this one.
okay.
What I found interesting was up around Chico and east of Chico and northeast of Chico, a lot of pockets in there that I haven't heard addressed before, and interesting.
Yeah, that is a shortcoming. I mean, it only covers the southern
Right.
part of our region.
Thank you.
Okay, so another study was conducted by Tulare County to address drinking and wastewater needs of disadvantaged communities in the Tulare Lake Basin. That focused specifically on rural and unincorporated communities. It also uses the Water Code definition for DACs and includes information from PolicyLink, from the Department of Public Health, and from the 4 counties, Fresno, Kings, Tulare, and Kern. The study also contains specific information regarding drinking water quality and supply. So the Tulare Lake Basin study disadvantaged communities are shown here in red, overlying the PolicyLink communities in black and the DWR DAC places in blue. Altogether, the designated locations are about 4% of the Tulare Lake Basin. Staff recommends using this combination of the 3 tools, Department of Water Resources, PolicyLink, and the Tulare Lake Basin study, to delineate disadvantaged communities for the Tulare Lake Basin. And the staff recommendations for the rest of the region are on the next slide. So these are the overall recommendations for this information item, and this is the direction that we're going to be providing to the coalitions unless we hear otherwise from the board. We've already talked a lot about distance learning. Staff, like I mentioned, we recommend distance learning to be allowed with conditions that ensure appropriate information is received by the growers. We recommend using the Water Code definition for disadvantaged communities. We recommend using the DWR mapping tool with census places and available studies regarding disadvantaged unincorporated communities and drinking water needs, such as the PolicyLink and the Tulare Lake Basin water studies.
Before I comment, well, I will comment now. Are we going to do anything in the near future on disadvantaged communities within incorporated communities, or they may be in islands within incorporated communities? We got a lot of them
Right. So the reason
right
why
here in Sacramento.
Right. So the reason why we're looking at disadvantaged communities and we're linking it to the ones who are reliant on groundwater is that we're looking at more rural areas that have impaired drinking water.
Well, many of these
sources.
rely on groundwater too.
So yeah, I guess I need to look into how much of an issue it is in in an urban area where you have pockets of disadvantaged
I can
communities.
give you somebody to talk to.
Okay.
And Sue, can you just remind me what the practical implication of this will be?
Exactly. So we're looking at identifying disadvantaged communities that are reliant on groundwater and then making sure that the coalitions, as they're developing their groundwater management plans, prioritize those areas in their management activities. So it's timing and location, making sure that they as they're implementing their practices, they go there first.
Okay. Sue, I have no problem with this.
Right.
If I understand, I don't want the incorporated areas to fall off the plate.
Okay. I get
And
that.
we need to, prioritize this and go ahead with this total package.
Right.
We don't want to stop.
Well, so actually, the definition, I'm going to just move back. We'll look at the Tulare Lake Basin. So the definition, what we're looking at right now, what staff is proposing, is that we look at the DWR map, which includes incorporated and unincorporated places. So hopefully so if you look at, let's say, the Fresno area, what's in blue is the DWR census places mapping of disadvantaged areas. And I would hope that would cover the urban areas.
I presume it does, but I don't know.
Right. But I'll definitely look into that.
Okay.
So, Sue, the last slide here where the recommendation for using DWR for the DAC mapping tool, the policy link, that's just for the unincorporated?
It is. Policy Link is only for the unincorporated areas that are not tracked by census.
Yeah, and what I understood by Sue on this third bullet is they'll use the DWR and for the Tulare Lake Basin, also the DAC mapping tool.
So, right, Policy Link, so that we've talked about two studies. There's the Policy Link study, which includes the Tulare Lake Basin and the San Joaquin Basin. And then there's the Tulare Lake Basin study, which is just unique to Tulare Lake Basin. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any more questions. And Laurel is here to speak on this issue as well.
Any questions? We'd like to hear Laurel.
Thank you. My name is Laurel Firestone, co-executive director at the Community Water Center. So we really appreciate staff spending so much time and effort trying to develop clear tools and direction for coalitions as to where they can get data that they can integrate into their plans to make sure that they're targeting based on risk to disadvantaged communities and where disadvantaged communities are. We think that this proposal is a good recommendation based on the data available right now. I guess I wanted to emphasize a couple things. First is the lack of data that is publicly available and the fact that there actually is good data that could be used but is prevented from being used by non-governmental entities. And I would just really encourage this board to give direction and maybe themselves get involved with talking to the parent agencies, specifically the State Water Board and Cal EPA, and really encouraging them to make it a priority to make data accessible that can be used by the variety of non-governmental entities that are making water management decisions and need good data about where communities are and what community water challenges are. And right now, the State Water Board has a discretionary policy that is totally under their discretion, which means that they can change it themselves to make confidential all well locations of public water systems, and therefore prevent access to data that or documents that include that information. And so we believe that there's ways that they could make information practically available, and that they should make it a priority to work with stakeholders to make sure that they do that. As if they don't, I would say, a real concern of ours is coalitions are developing groundwater quality management plans right now. In fact, we just submitted public comments on all of the groundwater quality management plans that were submitted under this program, and we're really frustrated by the first round of submittals, and we are hoping that those will be improved. And there is a stakeholder process to discuss some of those. But those plans and the people developing those plans are coalitions, non-governmental entities, and they need information and maps about where there are vulnerable communities so that they can plan and prioritize based on risk. And if they're not allowed good information to that, it's a barrier to them being able to improve water quality and prioritize public health in the region. And so we'd really encourage the regional board to work with their parent agencies and show that it's a real priority to make this kind of data publicly available.
And are you talking about that data that actually was made difficult to get by the Department of Public Health when the Water Division was over there, and that decision was made, if I'm not mistaken, as a result of 9/11 and a concern about terrorist activity?
Yeah, that's right. There is a policy that the drinking water department at Department of Public Health had made to make all well locations confidential and withhold all data related to well locations. And it's made it really difficult to get any information about source water and source water protection. And that now that has moved over to the State Water Board, it's up to the State Water Board whether they want to follow that policy or change it. And I guess I also didn't mention, but just to clarify, in particular right now, the CalEnviro screen, the second round, one of the big things that it did is it added a drinking water indicator. The drinking water indicator took all the data that is available on groundwater quality, on public water system boundaries, on public water systems, and in the most sophisticated way that has ever been done, really, in the academic literature as well, estimated water quality, what people were actually drinking or accessing in terms of water quality for the entire state. So that would include, even the northern portion of this region. And that data, the drinking water indicator layer, and the data that went into that is, that information could be extremely valuable and basically has already mapped out where there's communities that don't have access to safe water, and overlaid it with socioeconomic data. And it seems like they've already done that work. There's a huge amount of public resources that have gone into that, and it should be made available in a way that people can use it to make decisions.
Have you been coordinating with been talking to the State Board about this?
Yes, we have, and we continue to, and we would love more support. I think the more that different agencies and diverse stakeholders emphasize the need to have this data to do important water protection work, the more likely that it'll become more of a priority.
And I think you inferred something earlier to the effect, reading something into what you said, maybe what I've heard from you earlier, but that they don't necessarily have to disclose the location, but there are ways to make the information available without disclosing the location. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, we think, I mean, first of all, they've been developing, and this is mostly publicly available. That's not perfect data, but they've been developing, the EHIB program has developed boundaries, shape files of the boundaries of all the public water systems. So you could use those instead of the exact well location. I still think that for groundwater protection purposes, it'd be useful to have the location of the wells so that you can have better groundwater data. But I think it would be better to have something than nothing, and there's a lot that the state board can do, and I think that I think now that the program's at the state board, I think there's much more of an appetite to figure out how to do this. But it would really help to have some leadership from this board in highlighting needs for this.
If I can move to another topic, I agree that priority should be given to those disadvantaged communities we've already identified, but could you comment on issues with the urban disadvantaged communities?
Yeah, I think the issue with mapping disadvantaged communities and the definition of disadvantaged communities is that it really depends on the context, what that mapping should look like. And so, this program is the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. Most of those irrigated lands are not within urban boundaries. There may be some, but I do, and I agree with Sue that I think their proposal using the DWR maps do include incorporated disadvantaged communities as well. So I think that the proposal by by staff includes cities and urban communities as well as disadvantaged as rural ones. But I think that the exact definition and maps used are, the reality is the way that you want to target need is going to depend on the context that you're working in. And so with the Irrigated Lands Program, you're going to be looking for those that are vulnerable to irrigated lands.
I understand that, but I just don't want them, as I said earlier, to fall off the
Absolutely. No, I think there's absolutely disadvantaged communities within urban areas, and it's something that the state as a whole is really trying to improve understanding of and mapping of and needs to.
Right.
So let me ask a question?
Certainly.
And I asked Sue the same question, and she came back with prioritize, but I still don't know what that means. What is a coalition going to do differently? What is we're going to have different plans as you get closer to an area? Where's the boundary? I just trying to figure out. We ID something. I mean, that's completely different than the data question you were asking. But once we ID something as disadvantaged communities, what does that mean to the program? And Sue can respond after, but what do you think it means?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in our comments on the groundwater quality management plans, what we said is what we would like them to do is say, look more closely. So what they're doing, in the Tulare Lake Basin, the coalitions have mapped out high vulnerability areas, and every coalition is having to do that. The reality is, for nitrate and groundwater in much of the Tulare Lake Basin, especially on the east side, it's most of the land area is high vulnerability areas. So it's most of the coalition's area, and so when they are looking at how they're prioritizing their management plans, we think that what they could do is look at those areas within like extremely high vulnerability area for disadvantaged communities, and start with those and make sure that those are the first ones that have on the ground nutrient management plan training, that get the first technical assistance around implementing the most efficient practices, that are places for pilots for ways, for example, targeted recharge or mapping of abandoned wells that may not have been fully sealed, and that they start with those areas as the very first places that they look more closely at piloting and targeted actions in their management plans. And we really see those management plans as like, what are the benchmarks, the timeline benchmarks, objectives that and triggers that will lead the coalition's actions in protecting water quality. And so we think it should start with those areas that are the most vulnerable to disadvantaged community drinking water supplies. Does that help?
That's helpful. Thank you.
Any further questions?
Not for Laurel.
Thank you very much, Laurel.
Thank you.
Dr. Longley, in fairness, I appreciate the answer she gave and the question you asked, but we didn't itemize this agenda item to talk about how this data would be applied, and I'm a little concerned if we
Yeah, and that was my
start
next,
going
that was
off
my next
into the
question
next- I
based
think
on the
it's
final
unfair
slide.
since we didn't notice it that way that we start talking about how it would be used. I think those questions, I mean, we've made it clear it's for prioritization of activities. but-
Exactly. Well,
But I
that's-
just want, I just want to make sure we don't get too detailed about that since we didn't really agendize the item for the discussion on the groundwater management plan.
You know this board can get into the weeds real easy.
Yes, I do.
Does this mean I can't talk?
No, you can't talk. Perry, go ahead.
Okay, I gotta take a deep breath here. The Irrigated Lands Program, if we move in this direction, is becoming a social program. This is not the Irrigated Lands Disadvantaged Community Fix-Up Program. And I want to say that with all due respect to disadvantaged, I live in one, live in Parlier, I know exactly what we're talking about, but we had our GAR laid upon with this concept of where's the disadvantaged communities in your high vulnerability area. We thought 40 to 45. A map came back with 750 disadvantaged communities, which most of them we had never heard of. What's a disadvantaged community? 15 and above hookups. Well, we countered in our GAR that we are going to prioritize not by disadvantaged communities, but by what we have control over, crops. We are going to prioritize our management plans based on our acreage of crops with the argument that the footprint of our major crops is going to have more impact on fixing groundwater than if we go out and have 725 little circles drawn around and we're going to do outreach around Planada and all these little towns. If we're trying to improve groundwater quality, in our opinion, in our program, we said, let's go talk to almond growers. Let's talk to grape growers. And we get all of our grape growers and almond growers in high vulnerabilities to do everything starting now. As soon as the plan's done, go to those guys. That's far bigger impact for disadvantaged community, advantaged communities, middle of the road communities, and every other community out there. This is it's hydrogeologic, not a social program.
This board hears you. I think that to pursue this further should be done at another board meeting that's properly noticed for this. But I do want to note that one of the issues that has been faced time and again within the IREMs, when IREM funds are being allocated, is the fact that disadvantaged communities have had a very, very hard time competing. Prop 50, they basically got nothing.
Don't disagree one bit,
And so we need to identify these. We need to find ways of ensuring, certainly not all of the IREM funds, like Prop 84 funds now, but certainly some of those funds, a fair proportion, whatever that is, and I don't want to get into a discussion of that, being allocated for projects. And one of the issues is that I've also seen is some of the larger DACs, ones that are able to have an engineer, consulting engineer, typically get funds. It's the very small ones that have a very difficult time of even being able to compete at all. So I think this mapping these, identifying them is extremely important. Next steps, well, as was pointed out, we're not getting into the weeds here, but we do think it's a priority. We think we need to move ahead on this.
Again, but I'm back to what John said. What does it mean when I go out and do an implementation plan? And I think that it's got to be within our not authority, but in our charge, and what we have control over and what we have influence over is our growers.
And I have to agree with you in part, but I also very sympathetic to the need for this program here. It would appear that there needs to be some more discussion with staff on this.
Yes.
And if you think it appropriate, please keep me in the loop.
How then using this information as it's mapped? The question for the board today and for the input from the interested parties is this a doable definition? We're recommending you say, yes, this is a good way to define it.
Are we allowed to make,
But
are we allowed to nod our heads? This is just a
Well,
informational item. Right?
each individual can say what they
But
think.
then once they have identified them on a map, the next question is what do we do with this information? And there's a lot of different parts to the puzzle to be put together before any decision is made. It's not becoming everything you do should be done in those areas. Is it related to agriculture, and is it something
Right.
that the practices should be focused in those areas on? So there's a lot of things to be discussed once a definition of how to identify them has been established by the board.
And I think you've heard the board members that are here state that we do think it is appropriate to use the tools that were mentioned by Sue, and that the definition works. I guess what staff doesn't want to hear, John, is we talk today, they make a judgment of where we are on this, and then they come back to another workshop or hearing, particularly hearing where a decision has to be made, and suddenly we change our minds on definitions.
Oh, sure, and I think I agree that Calendvirus Screen is probably not the right tool, that what you presented, maybe the overlay is, I mean, it sounds reasonable. I mean, but I'm just not comfortable saying I don't know what that means. I mean, we say, let's pick this. Is there SQL implications? I mean, I just don't know what it means if all of a sudden we've identified this in the program. And so we're coming at it kind of cold, and that's the only thing I'm saying is, start from the practical implications. What does it mean? Is this going to cascade? Is it not? And like Perry said, there are real problems in these communities, and a data issue is a completely different, and I'm not arguing against any of that. I just don't know where this is headed, and that's my question.
So this is Adam. Can I say one thing here? I think that this is something just from the history of the program as it's developed. When we first started this program, we didn't even have any of this information. We started down the road, and the program's always been about source control. We have other programs that deal with the CV salts and other programs that are going to hopefully get us to getting drinking water to these folks. But all the way through the development of this program, it's been really what I'd say unsatisfying when you see these communities with concerns, and this program isn't really going to get at those concerns tomorrow. I think that's the truth of the matter. But on the flip side of it, we are doing these groundwater assessment reports, and these communities are there, and these communities are impacted, and the source control program, whether or not we decide to go down the road of prioritizing based on that for these communities, the source control program should be aware of that. And I think that what we need to do next is to decide, okay, how do we use this information in our source control program, combined with what we're learning in CV salts and what we're going to be doing in that arena.
Yeah, and I just want to end by saying I agree with Adam what he's saying. I'm not against disadvantaged communities. I think we need to mitigate, but we just need to be careful what you're handing to the Irrigated Lands Program beyond saying, let's put them on the maps. We did. We put those communities on our maps, and I think it's appropriate. But when we're going out and doing something with growers, let's look at where the footprint is, the upgradient, and the source control. That's upgrading of drinking water supplies.
And I think that just based on what Adam said, and I appreciate you saying that, Adam, is that as the growers are out there and working their land, if it's in one of those impacted areas, those things, there's something that needs to be considered there. I think for the most part, if I'm understanding it correctly, and I live in a disadvantaged community, many times there's no consideration. So when you're getting ready to put in a well, you're getting ready to do your irrigate, whatever you're doing, you consider the area where you are. If it's disadvantaged, that needs to just be considered. And it's not it's not a social issue, as you said. It's an impacted issue.
I completely get that, but what I'm suggesting is those growers need to backflow preventer, fertilizer management, all the things that we're going to roll out here, they need to do those upgrading of disadvantaged communities, advantaged communities, all the communities. And those disadvantaged, sure, they can be priority, but I guess I'm prioritizing by saying, let's do almonds first because they're a huge footprint. Let's do grapes second because they're the second biggest footprint. And that's the way I'm thinking we're going to have the biggest impact. If we go to one community that has peaches, pomegranates, grapes, cotton, that is a difficult outreach program to do, and it'll have minimal impact versus if we do these crops that have the big footprint.
I don't think there's a disagreement here. I think your focus is probably right. I think you have, we need to develop information though that comes out of these programs that does have significant social impact. There is a responsibility there, and it's tied tightly to IRIMP and the kind of funds that come out of that can help these communities. So
I'm sitting at CV Salts for that reason, Carl.
So Dr. Long, I do want to say that, like I emphasized, that it's one more piece of information that we have put together with a bunch of other information to help guide, because one thing I've heard from the growers and the coalitions is the cost of this program and the cost to implement. And if a lot of their efforts are going to efforts that would not benefit some of these disadvantaged communities, then we would challenge them back on it. But if what they're doing would help those disadvantaged communities, then we would agree with those priorities.
No,
and that's a piece of the information that would go into our judgment as to whether yet we say yes or no to something.
I fully agree with you. Yes.
Okay, I'm fine with it.
John? Oh, Bruce, good. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Bruce Howell, Sac Valley Water Quality Coalition. I just want to make sure that I understand that direction will be to continue this conversation, not to use a specific tool. Is that correct?
Well, I think the tools we're using, identifying the communities, has been agreed upon. And that.
Would you be surprised to know that Yountville, maybe not the French Laundry, is a disadvantaged community?
Be surprised to learn what?
To learn that Yountville is a disadvantaged community.
It could well be. I don't know.
No, I just looked at the mapping tool.
Right.
And, I think the focus and the energy, and really for your staff's capacity, is to find the right tool before you use a tool. Because there will be a lot of discussion, and your staff is working very hard, but there are a lot of moving parts in this program. And I want to take off of their plate having to talk about, well, whether that's an urban disadvantaged community or something that
I
actually
think
needs to deal
today it
with.
was clarified that we are focused on the disadvantaged communities that are in rural areas. What I want to make sure as staff goes down the road, and it doesn't apply to ILRP, that the urban disadvantaged communities don't drop off the tool, because we've not been talking about them. Today's the first time that I've talked about urban disadvantaged communities in this particular setting.
Right, and this is just one layer, but not the driving layer of programs that irrigated lands would have to direct their limited resources towards, their millions of dollars towards.
I'm not really sure how many dollars go towards this that otherwise wouldn't. My great concern is having the data available. So within the IRIM program, which is separate from irrigated lands, but certainly there are some linkages there, that they can get the data they need to be able to, particularly for some of the smaller communities, that they can begin to have access to these funds. They have not had access to these funds.
Absolutely, and there's a focus at the state. I just wouldn't want a layer of the disadvantaged community to trump what is good groundwater quality below that disadvantaged community.
I don't see that. No, that's
Okay.
not what we're talking about.
But Bruce does bring up a good point. There are areas, and I had a friend who rented a condo in Yountville, and I can assure you I've been there many times, and there's some very poor people living in Yountville there are some extremely wealthy people living in Yountville. So I don't know what defines disadvantaged community when you
Well,
have such a mix.
That gets back to the difficulties with the true tools, and I was discussing that we recognize the problems with the tools that are out there.
Right. Just as long as it's just one layer in all of the decision tree.
Yeah, you got to bore down, and one of the problems we have is being able to find in those areas where disadvantaged folks truly live. Casey wants to talk. If Casey wants to talk, Casey can talk.
Sorry to keep you here a little bit longer. Casey Creamer, Kings River Water Quality Coalition. I apologize. I did talk with Sue before this meeting, and I didn't quite understand exactly what was going to be presented to you today. And I can't necessarily say that I disagree with the proposal that's going forward for the definition of the tool, but we've got people on staff that work closely in IRWM and are close to these tools. And I think what's probably appropriate before we make a decision on this is that we can go back and look at some of these tools, make sure that they work. And I think what Sue's starting with the ILRP stakeholder meetings, which we've got one in the middle of July, I think that's a very valuable thing that we can go back, put
Bruce,
this
before
on
you
the
leave.
agenda for the July 14th meeting, and then maybe we can bring something back to you. Which is
I
probably
think
reasonable.
what I gather is happening, this is information only, and so there is going to be a continuing dialogue. The board's not adopting anything today, other than we've told staff that we're happy with the definition and the tools that they're using now. And we fully understand the shortcomings of those tools. Yountville, Bruce's example, and our executive officers pointing out that there are truly poor people there and there are some very rich people there. That points out to the shortcoming of the tool. So we're working with an imperfect tool, but it's what we have at the present time. And, you know, we need a version 3, maybe a version 4 of EnviroScreen.
Dr. Longley, and I think what I'm hearing from Casey is saying that they want a chance at opportunity. We are going to be bringing back another information item for the irrigated lands at the July board meeting. We could add this on again for additional discussion if they want to, but I think if there's any gatherings of groups, we have to include Laurel and her group so that they have an adequate say in some of this information because they have a vital interest in that.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that, and if we're going to bring it back, Bob and Carmen probably have. They've missed this
We got
discussion.
2 more board members, and hopefully we have a sixth one by that time.
Yeah.
So that would be good.
And the ILRP stakeholders meeting is the one that's being Lyrised and Sue is putting together, so it would be all those people.
So I have representatives from the ag community and from the environmental justice community in the room. I'm just going to say as a side note that we've been looking long and hard. We have 2 vacant spots on our board. If you can twist any arms for us to get people to apply, please let me know, because I'm talking to the governor's office on a pretty regular basis trying to get 2 new board members. And now that I've made my pitch, we'll go on.
So Dr. Following up on that if they do have someone they apply, they should let you and I know because we can call, they go into a system, so if we call, they'll
That's right.
pull their name so they'll look at it.
That's right.
Should I wrap up?
Yeah, wrap up.
All right. So what I heard was agreement on distance learning that Dr. Longley would like to hear back about the
I think more than I think I heard other board members here talking about that.
Right, that the board would like to hear back.
Right.
Maybe in a couple years or in a year or about how it
Well,
goes.
I hear that we're going to have
About distance learning.
Distance learning.
Oh, the distance learning only. Yes, down the road at appropriate time. Let us know.
Right, and then staff will be working on a resolution on getting permission to allow appropriate designee as well as
That's right.
members to
That's right.
attend those outreach events. And then for the disadvantaged communities, we'll be discussing it at our July stakeholder meeting. We'll bring it back for the July board meeting.
Good.
Right. Okay.
And you know, I have one card here that everybody else has talked that's here. Mike Wakeman had to leave, but I have a card for Bill Thomas. Well, Bill, you checked the card off. You came all this way. I wouldn't want to deny you your chance.
It'll be brief. As to the Bill Thomas Kings, as to the distance learning, that is clearly authorized now under your existing order. The coalitions are engaging that and continuing to develop that. I was afraid that, and why we put the card in, was that staff was going to try to start limiting that. Can't limit very much something that is in the order already authorized. You clearly could do that by amendment of the order. So when I see allow distant learning, I'm all for it, and then with conditions starts to put the anxiety back. You can condition something so much that you're taking it away. Enough said on that.
Well,
I got a sense from the board
as
that
you heard-
it's very supportive of distance
Right,
learning.
and as you heard,
Yeah.
60, 70, 80-year-old women are great people, but they're typically not out there running the farming operations, and we'd like to have people running the farming operations.
I just wanted to underscore that's an important component of this, but I have a sense the board agrees with that. Our coalition is coordinated with Laurel and Phoebe and Jennifer and others in the DAC world more than any other, and we have for many years. We've done that on the governor's drinking water program together, on a lot of the programs that are being presently developed on the ground to deal with drinking water. We had done that when the law was changed to recognize the importance of these communities. But beyond that, we don't see a huge distinction between our interests, in the ag community, for the areas in which we live and rely on drinking water, than the disadvantaged community drinking water. So in our definition, for our purposes here, of DACs, we certainly need to make it broad enough that none that are important are excluded, but narrow enough that we're focused to make some meaningful actions. And clearly, our programs, have to regard drinking water for all of the communities as an important component as we're working towards the cleaning up aquifers on the long run. It's very certain that I think we need to start with looking and prioritizing our work in the vulnerability areas. Ours haven't yet been identified because in this program, those arise through approval of the GAR, and some of those aren't completed yet. But that's a good start. That's how we're focused on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Timing was perfect. With that said, we will, do I have any more business to do? Executive Officer Creed? Council Palupa?
No, are you complete?
I wrapped up and then Bill
Okay,
came,
all right.
so
Good. Before I adjourn, I want to make sure. So
No.
we adjourn to our next regularly scheduled meeting, which will be in July. I don't have the exact date.
End of July, the 30th, 31st.
July 30 and 31st. Thank you.